That's really cool that like
It's
because your timeline is, it's nice to hear about like your eclectic background too, like all the different interests. It makes a lot of sense too. But your timeline is you started making content like mid 2023 ish, something like
May
that.
2023. We're at like the 2-year mark
We're
right
at the
now.
2-year right now.
Almost
Okay.
exactly. Yeah.
So, you know, you're doing all these other things before that, but you get thrown into this world because you grew very, very quickly.
Very quickly.
And I would imagine you didn't expect anything.
No, not at all.
Happened, right?
I mean, I hoped, but I didn't.
Yeah.
I didn't even really hope in the sense that, like, I wanted to make a career of it, but I also knew that it's going to be your job every day. So
Yes.
make it something you love, and you have to make that the career. You can't like tamper with that just to get fame or whatever the fuck it is.
Absolutely.
Because you're going to hate it, and it's not going to be you and fulfilling. But literally the first video that I put up went viral on TikTok, and it was a small
What was
viral.
that video?
It was Who Owns the Media, and I got it all wrong, and I fucking like everything I like. I mean, I didn't get it all wrong, but I was obviously like completely uninformed. And I'm still, you know, always learning. But that one was got like immediately 40 or 50,000 views or something right away. And then the next one again, and the next one again. And it was very quickly. And then within 2 weeks, it was like something hit 1 million. And then by 1 month into it, I was like quitting all my jobs and just like, this is full-time pay.
Going all in.
Yeah, it was like my second paycheck from TikTok. I think I was saying was like $16,000.
Whoa,
Yeah,
that's a
TikTok
lot on
pays
TikTok.
real good.
Yeah.
Yeah, and because at the time I was mostly on like kind of like BlackRock grocery store subtle conspiracy theory kind of content.
Subtle.
Very simple and like not censored at all. And so I was highly boosted. I was making long form videos as they were pushing their new long form 10-minute videos. I had all the right like kind of luck and some skill to just blow up really fast.
Well, you also have a great, like, your way to hook people and tell a story is phenomenal. Like, you hear the first 15 seconds of a video and you're like, damn
Thanks,
it,
man.
am I really?
Thanks, man.
The next 7.5 minutes, all right, they're gone. Like, you obviously had that from day one. I was telling you, I found you, I didn't find you on TikTok. I was basically like off TikTok. I haven't been on TikTok since 2022. But I found you on Twitter when you had like 2,000 followers.
Yeah.
When you were first there, and it was obviously one of the reposted TikTok videos, and I was like, "Oh,
let's go!
This makes sense."
And I got onto Twitter when I think it was weird. I didn't realize until I got there, but no one was really bringing that TikTok thing to Twitter yet.
No.
And I thought that had already happened because on TikTok, what I was doing was so normal. And Joe talked about this on his show that like he was like, "This is like your thing," like pointing at the things and like, and I was like. Joe, everyone does that. But I didn't really realize that he's right, actually. It's like TikTok, everyone was doing that because they have a great green screen.
But not on Twitter.
But it was never on Twitter. And so like I was one of the first guys that kind of brought the TikTok to Twitter. And I saw how well you grow if you're a video creator on Twitter because everyone, like you'll read text all day on Twitter. You don't like hit follow because someone wrote 2 good sentences. But if you see a good video from the creator, you're like, I'm going to follow that guy because he's the one that makes these videos, right? It's just a much more followable kind of a piece of content.
Yeah, you got to teach us that because our videos will do tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of views a day on our second YouTube channel, and those same videos will do fucking 10 views on my Twitter.
You know,
we've been posting.
I don't think there's a real format, but I think that at the time, early on, and in that exact context, the format was that yours would have been too produced. And part of what made mine go, and still to this day, is that they're not highly produced.
Yep.
Yeah, and they feel a little more personal and intimate, and like more story, like because that connects you to the character, connects you to the storyline. And we, as a generation, have been slowly being trained to just skip things that might be ads, things that are highly produced, things that feel like there's money behind them. It's like, fuck that. Oh, this is like some random dude. Right. And so TikTok really, it just forced its way in and showed a need, a desire in our psyches to connect back with real people, I think, because we are over ads and we're over, network television. And even though it's like you guys are just, some homies making content, if you overproduce, it can still feel like it's that.
Yeah, you're talking about
thing,
like
right?
when you run into something in the feed where you can tell like, oh, it's a studio or something.
Yeah,
it's not the dude talking to you. All the videos I've had go viral on Twitter are me flipping around the phone and talking right there. So I totally see what you're saying.
Yep.
But like you kind of like came together at a critical time because we're like 2.5, 3 years post the beginning of the pandemic. Shit's kind of messy at this point. When you were first coming up, there's one crazy war going on. A few months later, there was going to be another one going on. Obviously, we'll talk about that today. But, I think that people felt really jaded.
Yeah.
And so they were suddenly looking at things that maybe they took for granted in the past, like, oh yeah, this is probably perfectly normal. That now it's like, oh well, what really is behind that? And you were the guy, even if it was like, I forget what you called it, but like simple shit to start, like, oh, here's what BlackRock's doing, or oh, here's what's in your fucking cereal. People appreciated that because they're like, oh, I've been doing that or a part of that my whole life. Maybe I shouldn't do that.
Yeah, and I think that I get called a plant a lot, and I get people attacking my growth a lot as like it must be controlled opposition.
Well, it's a Qatari bot farm.
I mean, it is.
Yes.
And to be clear,
yes.
And it's understandable. Like I would be fucking pissed too if I had been doing this research for 12 years and putting stuff out for 12 years and getting my accounts taken down and banned and censored, and then this new guy comes along and is not censored. But there is an element of timing that's really important, is when you first enter a scene, that's your first impression. That's your like first pop, your bubble, right? And if you do that when it's being censored, you're inherently trying to swim upstream in a strong current.
And you got your shit censored all over TikTok.
Well, a little bit, but it took a while.
It took a while.
So the thing is that TikTok broke the censorship open in a big way, because TikTok was not like, this is just my theory. It's not entirely evidence-based, but it's sort of experience and evidence-based, that let's say the American deep state, you know, the intelligence agencies and their buddies, they learned in the early days of YouTube that you can't just let people fucking put videos on the internet. That is a problem. We got to figure that out. Google buys YouTube. Cool, lockdown, right? Instagram comes out of Facebook and Meta, and that's already locked down, right? Twitter was already locked down. So like, sick, we've got this whole social media thing fucking locked down. Right on, bro. We've got the whole internet controlled in here. And then TikTok comes from overseas, even though like it wasn't fully Chinese owned. Like when it came over, it was, you know, not already American controlled, right? And so it became this big free speech platform. And that's what initially it blew up on in America, was like, oh, you can just say anything. And like everyone's just sharing shit. And not everyone was using that for disclosure type stuff. But once people started to use it for disclosing censored topics, there was a big niche there, and people started to realize. And that's back in the days when you could go to TikTok and that's where you really get your news, was on TikTok. That is not true anymore, right? And I got into TikTok at the tail end of that, when you could still do that.
But 2023.
And it was starting to get controlled in. So the Project Texas deal that happened, the first TikTok ban time around, that deal explicitly stated that we will move our database, our data centers, to Oracle in Texas, and Oracle will oversee them. Oracle is fucking CIA. And
I love Larry.
Thanks, Larry.
Great
and
guy.
They will have oversight over the algorithms, right? So that's a pretty obvious, like, okay, now the American deep state has their talons in this company.
But we have to watch it, Ian. That's
we got to control
works.
the messaging.
Yes.
And they did. And so as that was happening, the censorship started to ramp up. But I was still in like BlackRock conspiracies, which are super fucking harmless. And they were mega in the zeitgeist at the time. Like everyone wanted to know about the BlackRock. Well, the surface level is kind of harmless. Okay. And then once you get into the context and the depth and really understand it, I think it's like complex enough to really understand the true harm of it, that they're not super worried about trying to censor that, because that would just draw more attention to it than actually like the understanding what's going on there with like shareholder voting rights and the amount of influence that actually portrays. But once I started, because you know, you do enough of that research and you'll wind up in an intelligence agency rabbit hole from time to time. You'll wind up at Jeffrey Epstein from time to time. You'll wind up in all these other places. And I started talking about those other things, and those started to get me censored a little bit. And I started to get more interested in them, because once like I made this video that I'll never forget about. Do you know about the Duranganga plant in South America? It's called Devil's Breath. Vice did a really famous documentary back in the day when they were still real.
I'm unfamiliar.
And it's this plant from this flower that allegedly, there are different stories. Like the official story is that this is fake, but all the Colombians are like, no, this is fucking real. And if you crush up these seeds and make this powder, it basically, you can like blow it in someone's face. You can put it in their drink, tasteless, odorless, whatever. And it basically makes you super fucking drunk, but not incapacitated, and you can walk around, and you're wildly open to suggestion, is the urban legend about it. And so hookers will use it, and there's like stories from all over Colombia and South America, and it even grows up here too, and in Guatemala too. And there's stories of people like waking up in a ditch with no clothes on, going to their apartment, and their apartment manager's like, yeah, you came in here with your friends and like moved out. And like, because they'll like get you going on this shit, and then they'll be like, yeah, take us to your house. Like, take us to your house. Like, yeah, withdraw all the money. Like, no problem. Sign over the deed. And you're just open to suggestion, apparently, is the theory.
I love that phrase.
That's the story.
Open to suggestion.
And so you can just be manipulated like crazy. And so whether true or not, that's the urban legend in Colombia. And Vice did a crazy documentary about it with people on camera talking about it.
That sounds like an MKUltra term. Oh, they were open for suggestion.
Bingo. And so I put 2 and 2 together at one point, and I started searching through the MKUltra documents, trying to find primary source evidence of because they're going to fucking look into that. Obviously, they're trying to learn mind control, and I have had trouble re-finding. This is before I was taking notes and saving all my screenshots. It might still be in my camera roll somewhere. But I found at one point a document that had the list of all the different compounds that MKUltra had tested, their official list with their note with like what they did with it. And they have a section on scopolamine, which is the name of the drug in this thing. And it says no benefits found, discontinued testing. I'm like, no. And so I made a video about that plant and that thing. And then about Jeffrey Epstein and his thing, and about what if you wanted to get someone that couldn't be got? Just asking questions. And that video got taken down. And it was one of the first videos that got taken down. And
when was that?
Oh, I don't know. It was probably May, June, July, August, probably like July or August or something like that of 2023. Okay. Yeah, it was early on. And that got me kind of like curious, like interesting. Yeah. Not allowed to talk about it? Let's fucking go.
By the way, real fast as an aside, it's interesting that that was your experience with TikTok because you're coming on in 2023 and things seem to be open and you can do what you want until you run into this. Because we had problems with censorship back in 2021. On TikTok.
Interesting.
Yeah, with stupid shit, stuff that had nothing to do with anything. Like you would put a video up, you could put up a video that was basically like, Hitler, here's an example of a bad thing Hitler did. And because Hitler was in the video, they would censor it.
It was always AI based, and it still is to this day, where AI is just screening for words and then just being and censoring everything with no recourse. And so that was always kind of a problem and still is. But it started to feel more and more like there was American deep state interests being protected as well. And then the Israel thing broke out on October 7th in a big way. And then that is when TikTok became famous for this whole censorship thing around it. And that became quite obvious what was going on. But
real quickie, and I'm sorry to cut you off. I just want to have context here. You started this in May 2023, as you were saying?
Yeah.
How long before that did you start even looking into some of the base level stuff, like BlackRock and all that?
Oh, before that for BlackRock? Literally none of it. So I was a GameStop investor from 2021.
There you go.
And I didn't know shit. But my brother told me about it and I looked into it as it was happening. And I was like, these guys are fucking cool. Chill. These are a bunch of saying fuck the system. And some of them were making some great points and throwing up some great research. And they were if you're not familiar with Reddit is full of everything and everything in between. And it is very left skewed. But in that community, those finance communities, it was a bunch of due diligence about financial corruption, along with a bunch of YOLOs to the moon. And I got
You're marking all these, right, Alyssa?
Yeah. I got real curious about the whole culture of what was going on because I had no experience with it. And I had only ever tried to trade weed stocks 8 years before or whatever. Lost all my money, obviously. Fucking scam. And so I bought a little bit of GameStop, and then I bought a little more, and then I bought a little more. And I just followed along on Reddit all through the pandemic and was learning. And I thought when I started my channel, because I started my channel initially, I was like, these GameStoppers, why the fuck aren't any of you guys making short form video content? Because that's what the world is watching. And y'all are stuck in this little Reddit thread and no one is getting it out to the world. And so for a couple months, I was like, why is it fucking gonna make it? I'll fucking do it. And so I sat down to make my first video thinking I was going to make a GameStop video. And I was looking at a piece of due diligence that some other person had researched and wrote. And I was going to credit them and show it and explain it. And I realized that I had no idea what I was talking about at all. I didn't know shit because there's a big difference between scrolling Reddit forum and watching YouTube videos and actually knowing anything about the world.
Are you saying you weren't an expert?
I've never been to GameStop. So
you've never been?
I actually have been to GameStop. I've never been to GameStop HQ. But
then how can you talk about it?
How can you? Yeah, I don't know. Let's be clear, Douglas. If you went to my Twitter and read my bio, I don't know if he's an expert in Twitter bios or not, but maybe an expert could read him my bio and it says not an expert in anything but sarcasm. I scrapped that idea so fucking fast because I realized I can't explain this fucking GameStop thing, and I shouldn't anyways. I should start at the basics. I don't know anything, and really the point of what I'm doing online is that I'm learning. I'm a regular dude getting informed about the world and doing research and just asking questions and looking to see if I can find answers. That's what a teacher is. Secret about teachers, a lot of them don't fucking know what they're teaching you until the month before they teach it to you. Like they know, but they need to like go back and reread the textbook and like rebuild the curriculum. And like if you're a college professor, you're probably an expert in the field you're teaching, but not always. But a lot of like grade school teachers are literally just kind of like teaching out of their memory and out of the book. And
and they're teaching a wide curriculum. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
I
and they need
that.
to. And the skill of being a great teacher is being good at learning and good at modeling and good at sharing that process with lots of different types of learners.
Yeah.
And I had learned those things as a teacher and from my parents. And so I knew how to learn and what is required to, and I also knew that we have the crisis of learning in this country. And I got out of teaching because I realized that all my students were learning from the people inside of this thing far more than the people in front of them in a classroom. And you can be a really engaging classroom teacher, but like you're only going to change your 20 students or your 8 students or whatever it is, right? And so I had sort of like fearfully realized that I need to go into that thing, into the screen, if I really want to like fulfill this like calling of mine. But I'm scared to start. And so there was like a 5-year period there where I wasn't teaching, but I hadn't started doing this yet. So when I did, I was like, all right, the calling here is education. And not to be like, I'm teaching you guys, because the first step is to fucking learn what's going on.
Yes.
So I've just been modeling learning all along. And that's why I rewound all the way from GameStop to like, okay, if money rules the world, I'm pretty sure that's going on there. Yeah. Then how does money work, right?
And so this is January 2021-ish. That's when this was blowing up.
No, well, January 2021 was when GameStop blew up.
Yeah.
But it took me years of just chilling and ultra running and cooking and then Uber Eats driving to like pay the bills and just sitting around waiting. And eventually I was like, all right, May 2023, I was like, I'm just going to fucking make some videos.
Okay.
So I didn't start making videos until much later.
Yeah. But you had first thought about it when the GameStop
Not really,
thing was happening.
No. Well, so the GameStop thing never ended. It's still going on to this day. And it was 2023.
I was
still
thinking
cruising.
you were saying like right when it was starting.
No.
Okay.
Right when it was starting, I was like, YOLO, dude, it's going to moon in February. Let's fucking go. And then DFV, Roaring Kitty, he comes onto the fucking hearing in February and he just drops the bomb. They're like, do you really think, Mr., that this is a good buy at, whatever, $40? And he's like, yes, I like the stock and I would invest at this price. Got off the fucking call. That dude doubled his position down, millions of dollars, dropped it right in, posted on the internet, and the whole world went fucking crazy. It was like, we're back, bitches. And the price skyrocketed again. Then it skyrocketed again in March. And it skyrocketed again in August. And it still is, there's a whole story under there. But
it felt like, just looking back on it, was such an interesting time in our recent history. But to me, when you look back on the pandemic, there were 2 main cultural moments that happened that kind of like broke the system. The first was when we were, call it, a month and a half, 2 months in, and the 2 weeks to stop the curve kept on moving the goalposts, and people were like, what the fuck?
Yep.
And then it moved into the whole election season, which was just crazy. That was the first one.
Yep.
And then the second one was GameStop, because now everyone's at home still, but it's the system, and the system's here to fuck you.
And it's the little guy against the system, dude.
And it's such a crazy moment that we have.
You got to shut that shit down so fast.
Yeah.
Like Occupy Wall Street treatment, that shit so hard. And to this day, that is still unresolved. Like most people don't realize, Credit Suisse collapsed. Credit Suisse is like one of the biggest financial institutions in the world, one of the biggest in Switzerland. It collapsed directly because of GameStop, because this guy named Bill Hwang, who runs a family fund called Archegos Capital Management, one of the Tiger Cubs.
He's right here. In Fort Lee.
So he was just trading leverage to the balls in lots of other stocks too. But in the report they did about it, they specifically in a footnote, like kind of quietly were like, and then because of a bunch of fucking volatility around the GameStop thing, Bill went tits up. And one of his main counterparties was Credit Suisse. And so his bags transferred to Credit Suisse. They couldn't hold them because these things run in like 1 and 2 year cycles based upon the swaps they're using. And so Credit Suisse went belly up 2 years later. And now UBS, the other bank in Switzerland, is holding that bag because they had to rescue Credit Suisse.
Ooh, I don't know
and that shit is coming due. And they are still that is still floating out there, and no one wants to talk about it. And
UBS has some issues?
Oh, yeah. UBS is holding all of Credit Suisse's bags. And when Switzerland basically forced UBS to rescue Credit Suisse because they needed to, and this was one of those systemic risk moments where the whole world was like, guys, fix this. Because if anyone goes down, if any of those big guys really goes down, everyone's fucked. Because they're all trading derivatives back and forth on huge leverage.
Look at the financial crisis,
Exactly, right? So we were looking at another one of those. And it got absorbed into UBS. And there's a bunch of press conferences from the time of the executives of UBS basically being like, fuck this. Fuck this. And they're holding them. And we don't know. There's almost no reporting or transparency about these things called swaps, which are basically like where you just trade around your shit and don't ask questions.
It's like moving food around on your plate.
It's crazy, yeah. But it's like from my plate to your plate, and
yes.
no one gets to see what got moved between the plates until 2 years later when you open the box and look, kind of a thing. And so UBS is holding all the swaps that blew Credit Suisse up, and there's stuff going down about it. But that's that'll come out when it comes out. But it was all of that stuff and watching it all happen that got me motivated to be like, you know what? There's a niche here and someone should talk about it. And when I thought I was going to start talking about it, I realized I was an idiot and I should probably rewind and learn. And so that's why I rewound to like, who owns the basic shit? Like, who owns everything? And then that turned into BlackRock, and then BlackRock turned into CIA, and CIA turned into Epstein. And
all right, let's unpack that tree right there. Yeah. Because again, you're starting at like May 2023 when you go public. Yep. Obviously, this is several months before October 7th and everything that goes down there. You started the surface level stuff. How did you first get to CIA? Was it through the plant video?
I don't. What? Oh no, not well. Maybe it might have been. I think it might have just been that Epstein was in the zeitgeist, and I was just kind of doing side research on him. But then in the research about who owns everything, you occasionally do these little side quests of like, oh, who's that guy that owns this company? And you click, and you're like, for example, I was doing one of my most viral videos ever was about shampoo. And I was looking up OX shampoo, I think. Yeah. And I Googled the company name, but I didn't realize that there was a Brazilian, I believe it is, company under the same name. And I accidentally got in this rabbit hole of this billionaire from, I think, Brazil that is one of the funniest stories ever. He was like a speedboat racer, classic billionaire, like one of the richest dudes in the world. He was trying to overtake Carlos Slim to be the richest dude in the world at the time, billions and billions of dollars. And then he fucking got like caught for fraud and literally lost it all. And his Wikipedia page is hilarious, like this big settlement. And he went from like however many billions of dollars to a negative net worth, like in the span of 6 months or something like that. Like one of the largest financial losses in billionaire history. Hilarious. And it was so fun to just make a video shitting on him as this little side quest inside of a video. But it's things like that and that's not a intelligence agency thing, but it's how these side quests can kind of come out of nowhere. And like you learn about Carlos Slim and suddenly you're in the cartels a little bit, and you learn about, this and that, and they just all are kind of like the beauty industry. You wind up in LVMH and you wind up in Estee Lauder, which I didn't know yet at the time, but those things tie very closely to Epstein. And so I'm sort of the type of learner where I like to do a lot of diverse side quests and other investigations and kind of get the whole 1,000-yard picture. And that inevitably I started to realize over time that intelligence agencies are one of the major power centers in this world, right? Because finance was obvious, and that's where I started. And I do still think that the banks are on top of this pyramid, so to speak.
And who's helping them with that?
Exactly. And the intelligence agencies are the hired guns. They're the jackals. They're the muscle that go out on behalf of the global banking system. And, we can get all into that, and all about that. And then there's also sort of the celebrity media culture thing that's going on beneath that, I think. And I do think it's kind of a tiered system of sort of like culture and media, politicians and governments,
100%.
Intelligence agencies in the deep state, and then and bankers are on the top, and corporations. The international, transnational corporations. I would slide in there somewhere around the politicians too.
But you're also pointing out how pop culture's downstream regular culture. I mean, it's just like everything's intermixed. It's not like these can be separate boxes. You can't look at Corporation A and separate that from random fucking dude in Hollywood B. In a lot of ways, there's commingling on everything, and like you and I were talking earlier about this off camera, but there's also this weird thing that happens where you got to make, especially when you're doing research on like, all right, where did something go wrong, or why are we this far down on something, where like intentions and incentives get mixed up because people are incentivized to do things in a chain of 10, 100, 1,000 other people, and they just kind of do their job. But this like road to hell, if you will, is right down the slippery slope of the actions they're taking because they got to report on fucking March 31st, their quarterly, so they don't lose their fucking job. Bingo. You know what I mean?
Yeah. And to re-say what you're saying, and then to take it further, is you're talking about the divide of like the conspiracy world loves to go in the direction of it's a plan, it's a plot,
right?
It's all this, shadowy cabal around a table planning the destruction of the world. Maybe there's a little bit of that in some regards, especially in intelligence agencies and governments, billionaires. But a lot of it is just that the incentives all align this way. And so regular good people just become a part of a system that does these things. And I would agree that every single one of my digs from BlackRock to Epstein and everything, I find that over and over and over again. And I did find it right away with BlackRock. And that was sort of this interesting first lesson I learned, this deepening. Because the surface level of the BlackRock conspiracy theory is BlackRock owns every company. They must own the world. But that's not true. BlackRock holds shares on behalf of all of us, right? There's all this more depth. But when you go through that depth, you realize that the way that our current version of capitalism is aligned is that all of those CEOs of all those companies that BlackRock holds those shares of, they have a fiduciary duty to their shareholders. And that's the point, is that if I'm going to pitch into this voyage for Christopher Columbus to cross the ocean back when corporations were this new idea, I'm being very general here, is that you want the voyage to be beholden to you guys who funded it, right?
That's right.
And if it's a public corporation where we all in the town fund the mill, you want the mill to be beholden to the town, right? The problem gets into when BlackRock becomes the biggest. BlackRock, Vanguard, and State Street are the biggest three shareholders, and then the banks and their buddies are the next, 12 biggest shareholders of every fucking corporation in America, from the funerary homes to the water utility companies to Chipotle, everything in between.
Oh, they got Chipotle too?
Oh yeah, dog.
Damn it.
And he's taking his multi-million-dollar bonuses too, but that means that they are beholden to the bankers and the financial system's interests, not to the people's interests.
That's right.
And they are legally bound. The CEOs of those companies are legally bound to increase profits at all costs. And so that's where the incentive structure actually, they are mandated to put poisonous ingredients in their food if it makes their bottom line better. They're mandated to do share buybacks if it's going to make their primary shareholders richer at our expense. And so when Pfizer and Moderna and all those vaccine companies make all this free money off of COVID, and then you can just look at the buybacks that they did, like Moderna had never been profitable before in their lives, their very short career. Look into who and why they were founded.
You can't just leave us there.
I mean, there's no smoking gun as far as I'm aware. There probably is a smoking gun. I just haven't dug that hard because fuck it. You've only got so much time, and once you see enough of the pattern, it's like, is it worth all my time to actually find all this stuff?
Last night, not a Holiday Inn.
And Moderna just kind of like young biotech company that then is deeply linked with the CIA in development of mRNA technology through a small company called Resilience, where the CEO of MKUltra is on the board of Resilience.
Resilience?
Resilience. Yeah, Resilience.
That's great marketing.
Yeah, there's another word that's like a subtitle, sort of. National Resilience might have been the original name.
That's even better.
But Resilience is his name. Has the CEO of MKUltra and the former CEO of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation on the board.
Love that.
If I remember correctly, Susan Desmond-Hellmann. And that company works with Moderna to manufacture mRNA technology. And they made the mRNA material for all the vaccines, as far as I'm aware, for COVID. And so that's where it's like, oh, that's interesting. But then they make all these billions of dollars off of taxpayer gifts, essentially mandated by the government. Mm-hmm. They do all these share buybacks, where what that means is that when they have all these profits, they're like, oh, we'll share this profit with our shareholders. Great idea, right? All of our shareholders will benefit because we benefited. But what that really means is they're taking all of those profits off of our backs, laundering them straight back to the banks and financial systems and to all the CEOs and executives and everyone that has all these shares. And we're not getting any of that shit. So that's a way to then take all that money out of the company and give it to all the rich people real quick. And then, oh, sorry, it's gone. We gave it to our shareholders.
It's all gone.
Right. So it's this incentive structure is over and over and over. You realize that often you have good people working in a bad system, and even the people with the best of intentions. Like there's lots of great CIA officers out there that are there to serve our country and protect us. Mm-hmm. And they work in this corrupt institution that at the highest levels, they might realize 20 years down the line that like, holy fuck, I was facilitating heroin smuggling. And I didn't even realize it.
That's right. I had a guy sitting in your seat there a month ago, and for the second time, who it's like a rare person you'd be able to get on. He was a knock, which non-official cover, obviously completely deniable to the government. And, he's such a fascinating guy, and there's all kinds of moral implications of what he did. But essentially, he was the CIA's man in the cartel.
Yep.
And he was a chief money launderer for the cartel. He didn't start there. He started with a top 4 biker gang and then worked his way into the cartel. And so I had him sitting here on a Wednesday, the second time, telling the story about how he flipped at a top 5, top 10 bank, a top 5, top 10 guy who was just a regular dude to become a launderer for the cartels on behalf of some greater CIA thing that he needed to have happen. And by the way, the only reason this guy can talk is because there was a leak in his program to a foreign agency, and the foreign agency doxed a bunch of people on the dark web like a year and a half ago, so he had to be pulled. So he's like one guy I look at, I'm like, oh, he might actually be out. You know, none of these fucking people around, but he might actually be out. But, you know, anyway, so he tells a story about how he did that and like how he sold this guy. And basically it's like the Harvey Dent. You live long enough to see yourself become the villain or whatever. Like that, like the guy he's flipping right there is like, I'm just a regular banker. And then next thing you know, well, this seems like a good thing to do. It's not, but he doesn't know he's doing it for the CIA. Yeah. So a week after that, I have Ed Calderon sitting in that seat. And Ed's got, you know, going on one of his great rants where he's just like quietly like, are we going to talk about this? So he's like, yeah. And how about the CIA? The CIA flipping top 5 bankers. They're doing that in my country. We're going to talk about that. I'm like, funny you say that.
Had he already seen your podcast?
No, it hadn't come out yet. I said, there was a guy sitting there 7 days ago. He's the one who did that. Dude. And you think about this because he's one little cog on the wheel, right? And I've had a chance to talk to Matt a lot off camera too. And like, I didn't expect this. Like, I kind of like didn't expect to like him before I ever met him, but he's like a really deep kind of guy that definitely has a lot of scars from what he did. But I wonder, like he talks about some of it out loud, some of the moral implications, but I wonder what he thinks about late at night where he's like, was this X thing, whatever it was that he did, was that worth it for Y, or what even was Y? Like, I don't even know what they were doing back there? You know, it gets really complicated because, like you said, it doesn't take much. It takes one little rat on the ship to fuck everything up. My friend Jared Dillian has a great line. He worked at Lehman Brothers, which crashed obviously in 08. Yep. He has an amazing line from his book. I always edit it a little bit, but he said there were 20,000 people that worked at Lehman Brothers. 19,995 of them were pretty good people who were good at their jobs and wanted to work hard. I always edit that to like 19,970, but you get the point. Yeah. It just takes some of the people that got their hands on the right ignition and they're the wrong guy and they
the right quiet little room in the corner.
Yep.
Right. And especially in an intelligence agency where it's designed to be compartmentalized.
Yes, exactly.
And you hit on another important point subtly when you're talking about a NOC, non-official cover. Yep. The other thing about intelligence agencies is they were founded with the intention. The whole point of an intelligence agency, and I say this on every fucking podcast, is that it is supposed to be plausibly deniable. Sure. You only even need an intelligence agency when you're going to be doing things that you need plausible deniability around, meaning that if the operation gets found out, you have layers of protection to say that wasn't us, right? And there are some things the intelligence agencies do that they're like, yeah, we do that. Right. But a lot of the programs they're doing is intentionally to be deniable. And so when you're researching, you know all about this, is when you're researching anything to do with organized crime or intelligence agencies, you're dealing with information that is designed to be hard to trace back.
That's right.
And so you have to be playing this kind of puzzle piecing game, and you have to be very humble to realize you're not going to have the full picture, not jump to conclusions, but also be willing to explore avenues that are not fully evidenced, because it's not the same as like following a paper trail to a crime by some bozo. It's, you know, professionals that are covering those tracks as they go.
You're also finding a lot of slippages too. You're finding like a little thing that's in a random document somewhere that's got nothing to do with something. Exactly. And then you're like, wait a minute, and you pull it back and put it together.
Yep. And that's the thing is that, the neat thing is that the history of the CIA, when you really dig into it, you realize that a lot of them were fucking horrible at their jobs in a lot of ways over the years. Like a lot of them fucking sucked. And they left a lot of crumbs all over the place. Yeah. Like, so for example, I always look at Richard Helms' tenure, which is also kind of when George H.W. Bush got in, and they were pretty fucking airtight in their job. There's a whole heroin smuggling operation that happened around Laos and Vietnam that we kind of know about and we kind of have disclosure about a little bit, but it's really not officially disclosed because they left so few tracks and they covered it up so well, and it was very tightly run. But then you look at Iran-Contra, which came out of one of their like proteges. And Director Casey sucked at his job. Yeah. And he was trying to do it all big shot without Helms at the wheel and all this. And there's lots of documents that are both official and unofficial that kind of inform that. But it ended up with Iran-Contra blowing up, being one of the biggest scandals ever at that point. And so there's different eras of the CIA that have different amounts of skill involved, and they have different amounts of tracks left because of that. And going into the digital age, for example, Epstein is a good example of one that was founded pre-digital age, but then exposed in the digital age. Yes. And so that's one where these older guys are often leaving tracks they're not realizing they're leaving. Hillary Clinton is fucking using a private email server in her bathroom or whatever, and she doesn't even realize how many tracks she's leaving. And like, they don't even realize that, you know, disguising what you're talking about by saying the kids will be in the pool, or there's like a handkerchief with a pattern on it, or like Obama's flying $65,000 worth of hot dogs to a White House party. Those kinds of things are not going to protect you if you're going to leave the whole fucking email server open for people to find and read through, right? So there's a bunch of dinosaurs that are getting caught in this trap right now in the pre-digital to digital transition. Then we're getting a lot of information with that exposure.
And that's the other thing though too, because we have access to so much now, and we can get things exposed and read through stuff, and even, you know, you'll get recordings of things that get leaked and stuff like that. Yeah. It's a gift and a curse, because we get access to like people that can be doing dark shit, and probably are.
Yeah.
But then we also get access to so much that, you know, especially when it's compressed down to, you know, viral this or viral that of this message or that, whatever. It's like anything can make it sound like it's something sinister. There was a great line. I was talking to you about Rajaratnam off camera a little bit when I had him in. But from his case, I'm not going to get into his whole case right now, what happened there. He really got fucked. But it involved like the wiretaps are what buried him. And the wiretap should have never been allowed in the trial. The government got them illegally, and that was proven in court. The judge admitted it, and he left them.
Yep.
And so that judge then, right after the trial was done, cashed in and opened up a law firm where they specialize in defending insider traders that, you know, he just oversaw a whole case on. So he's doing a frontline interview, you know, going through the whole case because it was huge at the time. And he admitted on camera, he said, yeah, wiretaps are tough. And they're like, why? And he goes, because if I record you for 2 years, for tens of thousands of hours, and I can find a few messages here and there, maybe like you call your mom and you say, I'll be home for spaghetti by 5, you sound guilty of something. Yeah. And so when you mix that in with also then, like, let's look at like a dinosaur, like a Hillary Clinton or something like that, with people that definitely were involved in some dark shit at the government level, right?
Yeah.
Now anything that we can pull of them on information later, it's just going to be like, there it is, Epstein, or, you know, insert whatever here. And sometimes it might be true, and other times it's like, well, is that just,
or is it really?
Yeah,
right?
it's so gray area. But you're right. These people, it's an amazing point, man. These people never thought about that.
Yeah, they did not expect it. And the thing is that the people that are at the upper echelon levels, the ones that have the capability to create compartmentalized programs, the ones that have the budget capacity to, like, you know, pull these kinds of strings and run these kind of ops, they're the oldest. They're the ones that don't necessarily understand the digital age. And so there's a lot of stuff like that that's still kind of getting played out. But you're right that the digital age also comes with a lot of, and like I'm guilty of this too sometimes too. It's a learning process for all of us of trying to figure out the line between, like, if you think you're onto something and you want to share it, sharing it, but sharing it in a way that is not implying things that you aren't sure of, or like that. It's a risky business between the difference between a real fact or genuine mistakes of, like, just over, you know, extrapolating. But then there's this whole other spectrum of just, oh, I'll get views if I just portray this way.
That's the problem,
right?
man.
And I got into actually one of these little extra side niches I got into is when I'm scrolling Instagram, and I don't do enough of these anymore. I should get back to them, of like, you scroll Instagram and you get these fucking conspiracy theory videos that are clearly just a conspiracy theory video for the sake of views. And one of the early ones that I found when I kind of came up with this idea that is not my idea, but it was like, this mysterious LLC is buying up all this farmland in Nevada and whatever. It's like, they own all the farm. Who is this LLC? Da, da, da. And then it ends. It's like, fuck you. What are you doing? So I was like, I'll look it up. And I spent like a 2-day long period looking into this mysterious LLC that was buying up all this land. And it pretty much turned out to be like a family owned company that was like a shipping logistics company that was like building out shipping logistics hubs. That was like no big deal kind of thing. But
Really?
but it was not hard to spin it, because it was like a kind of an immigrant family name, and they'd picked a weird name, and so there wasn't a lot of documentation, and they were buying up all this land, and it was like spooky.
Yeah.
And then they put spooky music over it, and it got a bunch of views, and it was like, like, come on, guys.
That's the thing, man.
Or maybe they were working with the mob and with the intelligence agencies and doing a front operation. I don't fucking know.
And that's the thing. Like, sometimes it could be like, conspiracies are so much fun to talk about, and that's the problem, because guess what? As you and I both well know, some of them are very real.
Yeah.
The issue is when we start it, like, I always worry about the boy cries wolf thing, this, which is exactly what you're bringing up, because if we start saying fucking everything ever is that's what they want, because then they can be like,
I think they intentionally fund content like that.
I agree.
To flood the zone.
I agree with you 1,000%.
And to get everyone to write off conspiracies. But they made a big mistake with COVID, because COVID was this big one that they did to everyone, that they left so many tracks in the snow that everyone is slowly figuring out that like, oh, that was a fucking conspiracy.
I think it was on purpose.
I think it was too at this point.
I think they wanted to divide society. A divided society is a compliant society.
Yeah, it was obvious from the start that it was a lab leak at least, but it's really shaping up that like, I don't think that everyone that was in the know was actually fully in the know. I think there's a lot of people that knew it had come from a lab and knew that we were sort of doing some stuff around how we dealt with it. But I don't think all of them knew that, no, it was a bioweapon we developed and probably released on purpose.
Sure. Yeah. It's crazy because like you want to even like that era was so fucking nuts. Like especially that first year or two right there with the pandemic. It's like, you want to memory hold this and like move the fuck on and say never again. But at the same time, it's important.
Want tribunals.
It's important that you, that's the thing. It's important that you look back on it and try to figure out who the fuck knew what here. Because, you know, what I look at it as is you saw slow deaths, right? Forget even people that, you know, died from COVID or something like that. Like that's terrible. But you took people away from their livelihoods. Maybe their businesses ended and then, you know, they blew their heads off.
People starved to death all around the world. Loneliness deaths, businesses closing down. Exactly.
Everything. And like that was my biggest issue with like an Anthony Fauci, because from the beginning I'm like, you don't have to look these people in the eyes. You're just saying it from behind a camera, and even like let's take his side for a minute, which I'm not taking his side, but just play it this way. Where let's say he even believed a lot of the shit he was saying. He's not thinking about the greater consequences. I mean, it was the same guy who's like, "Yeah, we're never gonna shake hands again." Fuck you.
Yeah.
Like I'm gonna go live my life. You know what I mean? And I think people after it took a while for some people, and I understand that, but after a while, people were like, "Oh, this is bullshit."
But it was like a global crash course in bullshit.
Yes.
And it was in bullshit in the sense of how conspiracies can be hatched from beneath, but also in how they can be covered up from above and how they can utilize that to implement more controls and how the consequences down the line can work. And I think that like I would not wish COVID on us the first time or again, but I think that the way they bungled it and the way we ultimately responded over time, though, you know, God rest the souls of those that aren't with us anymore, I think that we turned it into a net positive for the long view of humanity, in the sense that I think that as a world, we learned some really invaluable lessons that we wouldn't necessarily have learned if we hadn't had like the media space that we'd had and the podcasters talking about it that we'd had and the, you know, the politicians now digging into it a little bit more. Like there's people that stepped up and did not comply and actually made a difference. Doctors, you know, whistleblowers, all that because of their combined effort and still working, I think that is building a huge positive, net positive in the long run out of it all.
What percentage of people you think learned though?
Well, depends on if I'm talking about my friends the people I hang out with now or like the people back in Bellingham.
Well, and that's the thing. Here's the issue. I was just recently at a dinner table with a bunch of people, all different types of people. And there were all little conversations going on, and I would just kind of listen in on all these. Yep. And I can tell you the algorithms at that table were diverting all over the place. Yep. And I was like, this is, and I already knew this, but I'm like, this is just I wish I could video this right now, because what's obvious to you or obvious to Alessi on something else or obvious to me on something else, to someone else, they might think it's obvious in the other direction. And maybe on that one, they're wrong. Maybe on another one, they're right and we're wrong. You know what I mean? It's such a complex thing. But with COVID, that's why I say, like, it feels like it was designed that way, because, you know, like there's these little moments that happen in this podcast studio all the time. Like this seemed like innocuous when it's happening, and then you're like, oh shit, wow. And then later it keeps coming back to you. And very early on, when I was in my parents' house, I had my buddy Alex Horowitz, who was one of the first guests on here. He was on for number 17 and 18 because we recorded for like 6.5 hours. And this was right before the election in 2020. And at the time, he was the chief of staff of a company called 8 Sleep, which is the really cool science beds that
I know about them.
It's actually an amazing product. So he had been around all these big technorati people, right? Like all the big funds, all the big thinkers, the VC guys, and he had such a balanced way of putting things. And one of the things he said is that, you know, you can hack culture by simulating it ahead of time. And I'm not going to say it as beautifully as he did. People can go check that out. It was like maybe an hour into that first conversation we had. But I was like, what do you mean? And he goes, these companies, these social media companies, and by extension, you and I can say, therefore, governments and intelligence agencies, which are within them, have the power to test like an impetus, like test something like if simulate what would happen to this subset of people right here and this subset of people here. So they can see how people are going to be mentally predisposed to respond to whatever this impetus is. Yeah. And so with something like COVID, they would have known ahead of time. Okay, these people are going to be all about it and follow whatever we say, and these people are going to be like, fuck you, get off my lawn. And it's going to divide people.
Yeah. And this is one of the biggest questions I've not answered for myself, because clearly, well, not clearly, maybe, it would seem that the perpetrators bungled it and did not achieve their actual end goal. It would seem.
It would seem.
Or you have to go to a whole nother level of 5D chess where we are fucked and they did get what they wanted and Trump is probably their guy and we are getting slow walked into a technocratic death hole.
Oh, that just went up
and
6
that shit's
inches.
Dark, right? That shit is dark. And that is possible. That's 100% possible. I don't think it's likely, but it's, we should be vigilant. But because if they have that level of competence to be like testing these things and knowing these things, and because I think that the issue with that is that line of thinking, though they have the capability to do that, are the people high enough up in these dark decision chains? Are they young enough to be thoughtful enough to understand how to use these technologies to those advantages?
It's a fair question.
And to listen to those youngers beneath them? And I think the evidence suggests that they are not exactly that forwards thinking yet, though there's a lot of people that are at that level. And Palantir is one good example of a company that is very forwards thinking, very effective, very in there, and real sketchy. Among many others. But
it's a wonderful company.
Yeah, doing great things for the world.
Great work.
But I would argue that there is we would be living in a very different world if like the cabal controlling the world, like the deep staters at the top of that program, had been thinking that way from before COVID. I think they would not have wound up with like Joe Rogan literally dismantling them single-handedly.
Or what if that's part of it?
What if Joe's
no, that's not what I'm saying.
No, but I'm just getting tinfoil for the fuck of it.
What if him being a guy that would respond that way is
Plausible.
tested, and it's like, of course he's going to respond that way because he's going to look at things that don't make any sense, and he's got a big platform and call it out. We could use that. He has no idea. I think about, dude, in our little studio right here, I think about that all the time. Like, what are we a useful idiot for?
Smart man.
Yeah,
Yeah, because you're right that what we see today, I'm saying it looks like they didn't win in the short-term context, as in they didn't get, FEMA camps. They didn't get ongoing forever vaccines entirely. They didn't get forever control. They didn't get the forever pandemic, whatever it is. But that wasn't necessarily their goal. If they were really smart, they might be thinking more long-term, and maybe some of them are. Maybe some of the really devious ones at the top, some of the super billionaires, whatever, maybe they are thinking like, we need to dissolve the truth a little more. We need to dissolve, the boundaries between reality and truth. We need to divide the people more. And so they're like, during this COVID era, we're going to get our payday. We're going to get this fucking control. We're going to get some more laws passed. We're going to set a precedent, but we're also going to divide. We're going to conquer. We're going to destroy.
Yep.
And all that did happen. And we are sitting in that world today where my truth is not your truth, is definitely not my parents' truth that are watching Rachel Maddow. And
oh, your parents still watch Rachel?
Yeah, they do. And they love her. And I've been working on them. But yeah, that opinion programming is strong. And there's a piece baked into the cake that is so important, that is like a immune response to other information. And it's this misinformation fear of like, no, like you're getting sucked into misinformation. Like anything you're sharing with me is misinformation. Like I don't even need to read your sources because you're wrong. Like, because Rachel says that's crazy talk, right? Don't matter that she reported on Russiagate for 3 years and never retracted it, proven to be false. Like, don't matter any of these things that they'll get wrong on these mainstream networks or even on the alternative networks. There's a immune response built into this sort of like hive mind thinking that's getting fostered in all of these sort of like sheepy kinds of ways of thinking that is super sketchy, because there's not a good way, short of like shaking them out of it somehow, which also like, how do you open people's minds up to realizing that
it's hard,
it's complicated.
It's really hard because we all have a tendency towards some form of confirmation bias, some stronger than others. But like, you look at something objectively, you just pointed out, great. You see the mainstream media get broken in certain ways with certain subject matters that they just dug in on and yelled at everyone who said the opposite, or even just said, hey, can we look at this? To the point that now again, it's another boy who cried wolf. Because what happens when, and I don't have an example of this right now, but what happens when Rachel says something on TV that's like, oh, it's actually backed by evidence?
Exactly.
You and I and anyone out there who's like not a hardcore like pink hair lefty is going to be like, at first thought, all right, should I even listen to that because it's Rachel Maddow? Which is why I always try to do that. I try, like, I don't care who it is. Like, when I see a clip from even, like, Don Lemon coming on, like, I watch
See what he says.
Yeah. I'm like, all right, what does he got here? Once in a while, I'm like, oh, that was interesting.
You'll learn something either way.
Yeah, blind squirrels, right, whatever.
Yeah.
But finds a nut once in a while. But, we got to be careful that, and I think about this as someone who's, like, in the independent media, whatever the fuck that means at this point. We got to be careful that the same sins that mainstream media was sucked down into, we do not become on the other side. And in my opinion, a lot of that can happen without, again, we were talking about intentions and incentives. A lot of that can happen without intention or bad intention or anything like that. There's just little traps that are out there that it really comes back to like audience capture. You and I were talking about this off camera. I think about that all the time. Like when I feel something getting pulled one way, I run the opposite way.
Yep, exactly.
Right? And it's just to reset things. It makes me a lot poorer than I should be.
Yep.
But in the long term,
important.
That's how you stay in my type of business, like being a journalist or being what it is. And I think especially guys like you who are looking at the most insane shit, that's the biggest battle you fight, because you don't want to suddenly be like, all right, I found X, Y, and Z that's all wrong about topic T. And then just assume, therefore, everything I'm going to find after about this also needs to be wrong about that. If you find something that's right, it's like, well, all right, this was right, and figure out where the fucking truth is, wherever that falls.
I mean, the most obvious example of that conference, I think there's a subclass, like above a certain age, like maybe above Gen X-ish, millennials-ish. Those older folks, they are way more prone to this, immune response, this gripping up against, because they don't understand, they didn't grow up as much in this social media environment. They don't understand that is how to source information from the internet. Younger people don't so much have that same version of that problem, but it still is there. And the most obvious example of it is Israel and Palestine, right? I think in the sense that people, and you can see it so clearly on the internet, that the vast majority of people wind up in their camp, and then everything from the other side is propaganda, and everything from your side is real, right? Yes. But before we get too into that, you're talking about in your side of audience capture, and in my side, a version of that, like, because you're a podcaster, people come to you, you talk. I'm like a researcher, and I go out looking at sources and trying to figure out what's going on and learning and then sharing. And the obvious version of what one of those like trappings in my side of that is what I would call like access journalism. Access is a hell of a drug. And when all those, YouTubers and TikTokers get invited to the White House to sit down with President Trump and to talk to President Trump and get the Epstein binders, that access feels real good, right? And suddenly you don't want to lose that access. That's like you're in the White House, right? And so you don't want to say anything bad about President Trump. You don't really want to like report on how RFK did that thing. You don't want to like, and that access has always been one of the first like low-level layers of blackmail. And it's not blackmail, but it is coercion. And journalists fall into that shit all the time. And it's very dangerous. And now, like, we used to have journalists that were trained journalists.
Yes.
And they were, then working in a system that was largely bought out over time and, corrupted from above. But a lot of those journalists were badass journalists, right? Like, rest in peace, Gary Webb. Yep. Now we live in a world where all the journalists aren't even fucking trained. It's just a bunch of random people, for the most part, that just like blew up because they shot a basketball from like the half court line or something.
Or the people that are trained who are living in mainstream media are breaking the rules of what they were trained on.
Exactly. Well, what are they even trained on anymore with the state of universities today?
And you're absolutely right about that. Let's even assume it's somewhat right. There's still like, I was telling you off camera, like I'm passionate about finding the people who are still in that world who do the job the right way, because we got to uplift those voices, the real moderate, like, let me just fucking get at what's figuring out here or what's going on here, because maybe you could save some of that. Like, I don't want to kill off everything, but at the same time, when I hear people be like, down with the mainstream media, I get it, bro. Like, I'm with you in a lot of ways. Like, how can you not be?
But it's an important narrative to refine. Yes. Right? Because I mean, it seems obvious to me, but it might be worth saying that like people like you and me, especially people like me, like all the communicators of journalism on the internet, the people that most people are actually getting their news from, most of them are not journalists. Like, I am not out there sourcing stories and like getting leads and like reporting the facts of the news that are new. I'm out there sourcing from the journalists that went out and got the stories. And I'm collating that and telling stories about it to communicate it in a way that'll get to bigger audiences, and then sharing that audience into the journalists that got it for me.
You're an amalgamator.
I'm an amalgamator, right? But without that journalist layer, all the stories dry up, right? There's no more information coming. And I think, actually, to our point here, let's just say the deep state, all these folks that would benefit from the truth being debased, they're not incentivized to want more journalism like that. They want facts to kind of become fluid. They want everything to be opinion programming and everything to be opinion fighting and everything to be culture wars and everything to be your side, my side. Having a strong journalistic base of integrity in the center of our country that's reporting the facts of the news without bias and opinion, that is critical to maintaining free speech and free and true information. And without it, people like me suddenly, like, how do I even begin to source information if I can't? And right now, what I tend to do is I tend to intentionally source mainstream sources, because we know that's at least the accepted narrative. Even that's like the paid narrative, so to speak. And sometimes I'm sure it's good, true journalism. And sometimes I'm sure it's a little skewed by higher interests, right?
For sure.
But regardless, this is the same reason why I source Wikipedia, because Wikipedia is highly censored and highly controlled. And so if it's in there, and you can check the sources, or if it's in mainstream journalism, then you at least can say this is endorsed by the machine, by the establishment. And so if the establishment is willing to say this kind of stuff, then for the exact same reason that when I report on Israel-Palestine, for example, I tend to try to find sources that are coming from inside of Israeli publications as much as I can, just so that you're going directly to if Israel is reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu was funding Hamas and they're having a problem with it, I feel a lot better about that than if Al Jazeera is reporting that Benjamin Netanyahu was funding Hamas. Fortunately, they've both reported on it. But that's another story.
When did you? Let's take one step back before we go full blown into Israel-Palestine, because there's one thing we've been leaving out there, and people probably want you to talk about it. The whole Epstein thing. Had you looked at that back when it happened at all, or was this you really came into it in 2023?
No, I hadn't looked into it in any depth. I've obviously heard about it, but I hadn't really looked into anything in any depth. I am new and young at this, and I don't hide that at all. And no, the first time that I dug into it was during that first couple months, just on the side, learning, researching, reading. And then, there was a development in the Ghislaine case. I think it was her trials is what was happening. And we were getting more documents and stuff like that. And that was when I first started digging into the documents, because there was new documents dropping. And it was kind of weird, honestly. I was new to X at the time. This would have been late 2023. I think it would have the turn of the new year to 2024.
Well, her trial
It wasn't her original trial. It was some new maybe it was Virginia Giuffre. There was new testimony that was released. I forget exactly what happened. Okay. But it was the turn into 2024, and there was a bunch of new Epstein documents and new court documents and stuff, and everyone was kind of collating through them, and X was having these big spaces where all the experts would come in and talk about it. And I had blown up on the Diddy stuff about looking at the Diddy transcripts and the Diddy court document stuff around Lil Rod's lawsuit. And so I kind of got defaulted into being this new kind of small big account on X, and I started getting invited into these Epstein spaces as though I was an expert. And I had learned a lot more than the average person, but I was out of depth next to everyone else that was in those spaces. And I was just learning a lot. And I wasn't trying to pretend I was an expert, but I was, involved in learning. And it was just weird to be suddenly thrust in the spotlight. And that really incentivized me and motivated me to really catch up and learn what I'm talking about more. So I got pretty serious about it at that point.
Okay. What did you first think when you came upon that? Were you looking at it
upon Epstein?
Yeah. Right away, were you going, okay, this was definitely an intel op?
No. At first, I didn't really have the context to know what to think. I think that I sort of suspected it was an intel op, especially once I came across the Acosta quote, the famous Acosta quote about leave him alone. He belongs to intelligence. Duh. Don't know how else you interpret that. But it wasn't until reading One Nation Under Blackmail And the first time I read One Nation Under Blackmail, I listened to it on Audible.
That's a heavy listen.
And holy shit, I didn't retain a single word of it, just in one ear and out the other. And it was by like chapter 2 that I realized that that's what was happening, because Whitney is such a dense writer and such a dense thinker that she's like in one paragraph, she'll like, I could make a 10-minute TikTok video about every single paragraph in that book, just showing you who that guy is and who that guy is and what that company should, because she'll just reference thing after thing after thing after thing after thing and how they're all connected. Yeah. And I do think that, like, you know, it's a delicate line, because you can get too connection happy without like fortunately I know that she does do a lot of deep research to like, there are connections in most of those cases that are like, there's depth. And when you dig into them, you can find it. But I realized as I was listening, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to finish this listen through, and it'll be like subliminal programming, so that when I buy the book and read it, I'll have like heard Goldberg before, and I'll have heard Promise Software before, and I'll have more like locates. I don't know if that actually happened or not, but then I bought the books and read through it a second time. Then I read through it a third time and took notes, because I realized that I needed to. It's just so dense. And so now I've read like the first one 3.5 times and the second one 3 times, and got notes all throughout it. And I still have a million things to learn from it. And I still, when I went on Joe Rogan and credited Whitney for all that work, she still came out and corrected me, because I got a lot of things. I misrepresented a lot of things the way that she would interpret them. Right. I interpreted them slightly differently. Yeah. And I love some of her corrections too, because they helped redirect me on a few of her points that were more subtle than I had realized.
What were some of them?
The two big ones were, I mean, the first one I don't think is, I mean, it's important. It's that Epstein, the evidence is not necessarily that he worked for Mossad specifically. It's that he was aligned with Israeli intelligence factions like Mossad is just one of many, right? And the evidence does not exactly align with him being on like for Mossad, which is sort of a technicality, but those kinds of technicalities do matter in this context.
They matter. That's interesting. So.
Yeah. It was, if some people called it a little nitpicky. I don't mind at all. I don't mind criticism one bit, especially when it's coming from someone who's way more educated than me that's helping me learn. The big one that was really useful is that she highlighted how I do a lot of looking at the first part of the thing and like Epstein backwards, and a lot of her book that is really important, and in some ways the most important to look forwards at, is that her book is a sort of a 2-part thesis. And one, this is where blackmail comes from, this is the history, this is how Epstein came up, and this is the history. And then 2 is Epstein transitioned in his lifetime, and all blackmailers have and did, from the pre-digital to the digital. And as we came into the digital age, they were all updating into, we don't necessarily just need these human operations anymore. We need digital AI technocratic solutions now. And all these new AI and tech companies, he was targeting them. He was purposely becoming friends with them or blackmailing them. They were building softwares. And now a lot of these I talked about the Paragon scandal in Italy that was just happening with you off camera.
Yeah, that was
we can come back to that another time. And then, like, for example, Palantir is a great example of one of these companies that's very, terrifying. Unit 8200 is that's the Israeli NSA, basically, Unit 8200 for the audience. Mm-hmm. And they are famous. They're well, I don't know if famous, but it is their open policy that they have stated before on record that they started exporting their in-house technology operations to the private sector, meaning if the NSA is doing all this tech, like hacking and, tech work for the intelligence community, it's like, let's turn that whole section into a private company and send it off into the world. So it's no longer affiliated with us. And it'll develop these solutions that'll, change the world and make it more secure or make it more this or that. But are you really not still working with them?
It's a Trojan horse.
Right? And in a way, it's that same plausible deniability, because once it's in the private sector, then it's not us. We didn't do it. They did it. That's their problem. And that was how intelligence agencies were originally founded.
Thank you guys for checking out this clip. If you haven't already subscribed, please subscribe and hit the like button on this video. It is a huge, huge help. And if you'd like to check out this clip's full podcast episode, that link is in the description below or right here. And finally, you can follow me on Instagram and X by using the links in my description below.